Good morning, everybody. Again, throughout, as time goes by, both Nhien and I get a lot of questions through email or our website. People asking real questions about real life that they're a bit confused about, or they're wondering what the unity principle is that applies to that. And it occurred to us that many of you here probably have similar questions, but most of the time you spend when you come here listening and to us talking, and we may or may not be on point for some of the things you're thinking about. So this morning we're going to answer some of the questions that have come through over the last couple of weeks, and I'm looking at your feedback. If this is the type of service that benefits you, perhaps we could do it once every other month or once a month or whatever. So let us know what you think about this. Today I'm going to ask Nhien about the third principle of unity. Very simple. It's our thoughts create our reality. And when I first heard that, I thought, wow, that is super cool if it really works. And so I meditated daily on the proper lottery numbers. And, this was 13 years ago. But I'm sure last night's numbers are going to come through for me because my thoughts do create my reality. What exactly does that mean, our thoughts create our reality? Does that mean that I can imagine a parking space and I'll go there and I'll find one? No. That I'll win the lottery? No. That my wife will change and begin to do every single thing I want her to do? No. What it means is the world is just happening. It's activity with 9 billion people at this point in time doing their everyday lives. The world is what it is. We insert ourselves into it, and the primary spiritual goal is to learn how to do that in a harmonious way. That we move in there not criticizing, not condemning, not fighting back, not being resentful of somebody, but how do I fit into, how does my path run through the path of life with able to maintain a sense of peace, harmony, and love. So I'm going to ask Nhien that question. First of all, can you explain our thoughts create a reality? What exactly does that mean? And exactly how much control do we have over it?
Great. Well, it sounded like you just answered the question. But I think, but what's beautiful in unity, frankly, is...
I did. But also recognizing the fact that you oftentimes eagerly disagree with me.
I do, a lot. It's
true. I see what you think.
Okay, great. Well, for those of you who are new to Unity, here in Unity, we basically have only 5 basic unity principles. And the first basic unity principle, just as review, is essentially the idea that there's only one power and one presence active in the universe. We say God the good, but not good with an opposite, more like good as an absolute, fundamental beingness of reality itself. So that's the first basic unity principle. Then the second basic principle really flows from the first, and it's the idea that if everything is God, if everything is this ultimate beingness or reality, then necessarily tag, you're it. That means that each of us is an expression of that one power. And then from that, then this sort of traditional Christian idea that something else made us disappears. Because if we are the very sort of essence of life itself, then necessarily we are the creator, right, of this life, and we co-create this life together. So the third basic unity principle that Duke just shared about follows naturally from the first two. It's this idea that made in the image and likeness of beingness or creation itself, I have creative power through the activity of my thinking. So the third basic unity principle is stated in the law of mind action. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Now, a lot of times when people hear that, they misconstrue it to think thoughts held in my intellect, that mind, produce things in the world. So if I think hard enough about a parking space, I'll produce a parking space in the world. But the idea is more generally this: if everything is consciousness, and I am an integral part of that consciousness, then what is alike is in consciousness, not necessarily in physical reality. So when I hold a consciousness of love, I'm more likely to have expressions of love manifest in my life. They might not happen in the form that I want them to be in. And that's where a lot of us can get mistaken by this idea that, yes, if love is the very nature of being, and I hold a consciousness of love in my heart, then I'm going to get that guy or that girl, right, that I want. Or I'll get my parents to do that thing or say that thing that is the evidence that they love me. But rather, what happens is when we hold the consciousness of love, what happens is that like attracts like, and that what we produce in the world is that which resonates with that beingness of love, whatever form it takes. But when the human being gets attached to a particular form, we actually reject or block off the expression of that love in the world, because we're saying, no, this is not love. That, to me, embodies love. Or this is not prosperity. Only getting that particular house means prosperity. And so we're not actually in the consciousness of either love or prosperity, trying to get the world to cooperate with us. So I think that's a big fallacy around the law of mind action here, to clarify.
That sounds very much like the law of attraction. For many of you who aren't familiar with that, it was a pretty big thing about 3 years ago. They did a movie on it. But the law of attraction basically states that when we move into the activity of the world, our consciousness or our mind is attracted to those things out there that are of the same emotional nature of the thoughts that we're holding. So if I go out and with the idea in my mind, it's a beautiful world, it's a wonderful day, my attention is going to be attracted to those things that evidence that. If my consciousness, the thoughts I'm holding are, it's a lousy world, it's no good, there's too much crime, I'm going to go out there and my attention is going to be attracted to that. If two people walk around the block, one has this is a beautiful world, and one has this is a horrible world, one is going to be attracted to the flowers, the beauty of the flowers, perhaps a baby going by in a crib, perhaps the clouds up above, anything that stimulates that sense of appreciation and gratitude and love. Or the other person's thoughts are going to be attracted to the garbage on the street, or perhaps a dead animal in the road. So that, for me, helps me to know that if I'm holding on to love, I'm not going to go out there and a hateful person is going to become loving, or that a dismal situation is going to become easy, but rather that I will be directed towards, my attention will go towards that which emulates the emotions that I have in my mind. Is that true?
Yeah.
Good.
I agreed with him once. But actually what you shared is beautiful, and it reminds me of one of the questions that was asked in this morning's spiritually speaking group. I think you're leading a class right now for folks who are interested in unity principles. So, a lot of times when we talk about these things, it can become very abstract, and conceptual. But really, the heart of this question goes to the fact that here in this world, in our daily lives, when we talk about the things that we're attracted to, there's a way in which the neon lights of the world, the advertising of the world, all of that is designed to attract our attention. The news, the media. And we so often find ourselves then attracted to this stream of repeated negativity, right? And then we're wondering why we're depressed and anxious, in our everyday lives. But what happens is there's a bombardment in the outer of these thoughts that don't testify to this universal principle of oneness. And so the big question is, You know, do we just allow ourselves to be attracted to any next new thought that comes our way? Or can we have some sense of mastery or power over our thinking, especially with the idea behind that our thinking then collectively as well as individually manifests our reality? So, for instance, if the world is warring, if our neighborhoods are in conflict, if we see tremendous division in the world of appearances out there, how do we even begin to source a consciousness that's different? And that's actually a little bit of a teaser, because that's our fourth basic unity principle, which is that through the practice of prayer and meditation, we're able to co-create together a different world. So we can take thoughts, we can take thought ideas from two sources. We can take them from the world that is already manifest, the world of form, the world that surrounds you, the world that you can see and touch, right, with your hands. But that world, for the most part, many of us are crying out about, is a world that feels very torn and very wounded. It's a world that's filled with suffering and images of separation, right? So if we look to the world for truth, what we do is we copy and paste that truth onto the next moment. We've decided that these are the thoughts that are going to fill my consciousness. Then my consciousness creates the next level of experience and reality. So all I'm doing is repeating what's already been here. And so that's why we can't simply draw from our past experience in order to create a better world for each other. That's why we teach that prayer and meditation are so important. And so what is it that we actually do in prayer? In unity prayer, we're not petitioning to some man in the sky up there. Instead, in unity prayer, we're going within to a place in us that knows our origin as the source of life itself, as the truth of love itself, as the embodiment of wholeness itself. And when we let those thoughts, the thoughts of the mind of God within us, teach us what we are and what life is, then our minds then are purified of the consciousness of sense consciousness, if you will. And as that happens, we begin to source into the world from a place of divine ideas, right? Thoughts of universal love, thoughts that the world didn't teach us, you know? And from that, we start to create a world that is founded on these fundamental principles that we teach in unity, right? That there's oneness, that in reality there isn't separation. But we can't do that if each and every day our source of information for what fuels our minds is outside of us, is told to us by the media, the news, by advertising. You know, in the group this morning, a question that came up was around, wow, you know, what about the stories of our unworthiness? Well, advertisers have every incentive to teach us that we don't look good enough, that we don't own enough things, right? All this insufficiency that it teaches us, stay out here and work out here towards gaining these things rather than center in like this deeper truth that enables you to know that you're whole, that you're one, and that you can live from that place. So yeah.
So if we can take it from a global aspect to a personal aspect, I think most of us here at some time or another have had somebody show up in our lives, whether it's a family member, a workmate, a neighbor, or whoever, and that is just kind of a repulsive individual. They're rude, they're belligerent. I'm not going to mention any staff members here at Unity. But, you know, I'm just. But you know what I mean? These people show up and they're disrespectful. They are non-polite. They are very critical, and it's just very hard to be around them. I call them the unlovables. How do you love the unlovable? Is it my duty to go out there and teach that person how to be nice and how to be loving? Or is it my job to go out there and learn how to embrace that person exactly the way they are?
Good question. I would say that, that it's not my job to do either of those things. In as much as, I think in traditional religion, there's this notion of if you're religious, if you're Christian, there are things that you should do and be in the world, right? There's this idea that, like, I should do this. Like, if we took that away and we simply took our life experience and said, well, if I have negative views about this person, and as a result of those negative views, I suffer more deeply, then I might be motivated in myself to find a sense of peace or an experience of love within myself by saying, well, how can I support myself in arriving at peace? Then it doesn't become about, well, if I'm a good person, I should go do that. It becomes about something closer to knowing my own wholeness. And so I think in that situation, the way a unity framework could be overlaid upon it is that, we teach loving everyone. But so often, especially if we came from dysfunctional family backgrounds, and how many of us didn't come from a dysfunctional family background to some degree, that our understanding of even what love is can be confused. And so for some of us, love is codependency. And so we might think, oh, well, going back into an abusive relationship is love. Or I should be able to put up with this or handle this. And so stepping away from that, we can focus on our consciousness instead and say, you know what? In the world of form, I don't know immediately what I'm supposed to do with this person because I've been relying on my past experience. I've been relying on what my parents taught me. I've been relying on what the world taught me. But what if instead I took a step back and went into a time of meditation or prayer where I gained clarity? What if in my prayer time I decided I'm going to invite a consciousness of love to teach me what love really means? And in that place, I might gain clarity that, love doesn't mean sacrificing myself. It doesn't mean being abused by another. I can set boundaries around myself in the world of form. I can declare for myself what I'm worthy of because I know my sense of self-love from that place in the silence. So I can take those actions on the outside, but I can still, in consciousness, send love to this person. And I think that's often the difficult thing that we face, where we think that love means staying engaged with a person or not setting boundaries with a person, when instead love can simply mean that I hold a consciousness of the highest and the best for this person while being grounded enough in my own being to set adequate boundaries to understand that love, universal love, quote, God's love, never excludes me, never excludes me. And so I have to honor myself within that.
Many years ago when I worked here as secretary, my boss, who was the office manager, was the kind of person that I've been talking about. She was a very curt and abusive at times, would raise her voice and constantly strike out. And as many of us in situations like that, sometimes we take responsibility. We think like it's my fault. And it got to the point where I went to the minister, who was here at the time, and I told him that I was thinking about quitting because I just couldn't work with Anne, was her name. And he said, well, tell me about it. So I did. And he said, would you do me a favor? And I said, sure. He said, Connie in the bookstore has to make a deposit at Commerce Bank down the street. Would you just walk down there with her? I said, sure, I'd be glad to. Beautiful day like today. Well, Connie had a physical handicap, and she could only take like one step at a time. It'd be a step. And so it took us a long time to get down there. Only 3 blocks, but probably took us over an hour. The next day or the day after, the minister called me in, and he said, "How did it go taking Connie down to the bank?" And I said, "Great. It was a wonderful time." He said, "But didn't it irritate you that she walks so slow? Doesn't it bother you? It takes so much time. How can you stand to walk at that pace when you know you could go faster?" And I was like, that's incredibly rude of the minister saying this about this person. And I told him that. I said, "She's handicapped. That's all she can do." And I was perfectly happy with it. And then he said, "Well, how come you accept her handicap so readily, but you can't seem to accept Anne's handicap?" Anne's handicap is invisible. We know it expresses itself outward, but perhaps she has something going on inside her, whether it might be deep-seated anger or a sense of unhappiness with life right now or whatever it is. But Anne is just being Anne, going through life the best she can be. And if you can embrace her handicap and not take it personally, you'll discover that she's just as delightful as Connie is. That being said, I try to practice that when I go out into the world, and if there's somebody who is particularly rude or insensitive, I try to remember that there's something going on inside them that I don't know. It isn't me. There's something that is bothering them deeply, and I don't have to know what it is. I just have to bless them. And my prayer is, may you become well.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Should we ask them for questions? I'd like to know what questions they have.
Sure, if somebody has a question, raise your hand. And yes. Yeah, I think what Linda is saying is are we denying the true reality of the world when we shut that off and only go outside when the sun's shining, so to speak? And that is a good question. Do you have an answer for it?
Awesome. Thanks, Duke. So I think it's actually a very powerful question, and it's one of the biggest criticisms of the New Thought and Unity movement in our modern day. And I think it's there is a confusion when the unity principles are applied. So there is a fundamental unity teaching around prayer called denials and affirmations. And in this prayer form, the idea is that you deny the power of a circumstance over you, and you claim a universal truth, even if that truth isn't obvious or manifest. Like, for instance, if you're experiencing financial distress, you might deny the power of your current circumstance, the state of your bank account, over your present good, and you claim, "I am prosperous and I am abundant." The way that that can be misconstrued is through psychological denial. I'm not going to even look at my bank account. I'm going to just claim and not deal with the present circumstance of my life. So the very subtle difference is this. You claim the circumstance. If you are an alcoholic, you claim that this is the circumstance of your life, but you deny the power of that circumstance over the capacity for good. And that subtle distinction makes all the difference, though. So you admit the circumstance of the world. Let's own that in today's world, there is tremendous inequality in how different races are treated. Right? We can own that, but not in a way that depresses us, in a way that helps us to face the current circumstances, but not claim it as the ultimate reality of being. So when we talk about going into prayer and meditation, we're talking about sourcing something that is pure potential, but that isn't necessarily the state of the world or the state of our lives. You know, in the example of prosperity, it may be that, like, I need to dig into this truth because in my family history or story, I have a lot of story around, you know, not having enough money in our family, etc. So what I need to do is tap into the place in me that remembers that I am a child of God and all deserving of infinite good. And so in that, it's not as if I'm dismissing the fact that my bank account is as it is. And so that first step of admitting the circumstance of the world is vital before we deny the power of that in our lives and in our future. And so then we can source a different kind of energy and power from spirit, from life, by first admitting the reality of circumstance. Now, in the state of the world, I think that's one of the big issues, that people who only want to look at what's positive, right, or are ignoring what's happening in the news. So the tricky part is to do this dance, and you can only do it by knowing yourself well enough to go, at what extent does watching the news now simply spiral me down? I'm not able to hold the higher consciousness in that. Or maybe Marianne Williamson, when she was here on Saturday, shared about this idea that the more that the prevalence of this outer conflict is happening in our world, the more we need to pray and meditate, right, to balance it out so that we can hold the challenging life circumstances, but not be weighed down or depressed by them, right? But at the same time, that resourcing through prayer and meditation is not to hide out from the world, but to increase our capacity to face the world with optimism, with faith, with hope, and with a consciousness and a feeling of love, so that we can move toward the world, not out of our anger, but out of our strength, out of our groundedness, out of our sense of oneness with everyone involved in what's happening, rather than increasing the sense of separation by coming back in our reactive self, right, and going, oh, I'm going to meet your hate with my hate and my sense of division. So yeah, thank you for your question.
With that being said, would you like to lead us into meditation?
Sure.